I walked into the house after a long day at work, ready to enjoy a quiet evening. But the moment I opened the door, I was met with the sound of loud, animated chatter. My wife and her friend were in the living room, their voices carrying through the house. It wasn't just the volume that caught my attention, but the tone, like they were deep in some heated discussion. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, the lively conversation died down, replaced by hurried whispers. It didn't sit right with me. What could they be discussing so intensely that it needed to turn into a secret the moment I walked in? I stepped into the living room and looked at them both. They exchanged a quick glance, almost like they were caught red-handed. "What were you two talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady but firm. My wife let out a quick laugh and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we just realized we were being too loud," she said, as if that was a sufficient explanation. But I wasn't buying it. "That's not an answer," I said, crossing my arms. My gaze shifted between the two of them. They both looked a little too casual, like they were trying hard to downplay whatever had just happened. My wife's friend avoided eye contact altogether, busying herself with her phone. My wife, on the other hand, gave me a tight smile and said, "I'll tell you about it when the time is right." That response didn't sit well with me either. I wasn't a fan of vague promises or being kept in the dark. But I knew better than to push too hard while her friend was still there. Picking a fight in front of company wouldn't lead anywhere good. So, I let it go, for now. After her friend left, though, I wasn't about to let the matter drop. I waited until the door shut behind her before turning to my wife. "All right, what's going on? What are you hiding?" I asked. My tone was sharper this time, more demanding. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's nothing bad," she said. "There's just a big problem. Something only one person can help me with. My friend and I were discussing it." "What kind of problem?" I pressed. She shook her head. "I'll tell you everything once it's resolved," she said. "But I'll need your help tomorrow. I need you to drive me somewhere and pick me up after." That explanation wasn't enough for me. "Why not just tell me now?" I demanded. "If it's such a big deal, don't you think I have a right to know?" She met my eyes, her expression resolute. "You're not going to get it out of me tonight," she said simply. "But trust me, everything will be fine." That was all she gave me. I wasn't thrilled about being kept in the dark, but I also knew that pushing harder wasn't going to get me anywhere. She could be as stubborn as me when she wanted to. With a sigh, I decided to let it rest for the night. The questions would have to wait until tomorrow. As I lay in bed that night, the unanswered questions swirled in my mind. What kind of problem was so big that she couldn't tell me about it now? And why was her friend involved? It didn't make sense, and that nagging feeling of something being off wouldn't go away. Still, I reminded myself that I'd find out eventually. For now, I had to wait. With that thought, I finally closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, the mystery of it all lingering in the back of my mind. The next morning, I was woken up by my wife shaking my shoulder. My eyes barely adjusted to the light when I heard her voice, sharp and hurried. "Come on, we need to go," she said. I sat up, groggy and confused. "Go where?" I mumbled, but she didn't answer. Instead, she was already moving around the room, making it clear that this was urgent, at least to her. When I finally got a good look at her, I couldn't help but frown. She was dressed up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. A short skirt, a fitted top, it wasn't her usual choice, and it certainly wasn't something I'd expect this early in the morning. "Why are you dressed like that?" I asked, my tone flat. She stopped for a moment, glanced at me, and said, "Trust me, it's important." That wasn't an answer, but she didn't give me a chance to press further. Reluctantly, I got dressed and followed her out to the car. She handed me a piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. I started the engine and drove, still trying to make sense of what was going on. The drive wasn't long, but my patience was wearing thin. When we arrived, I couldn't hide my surprise. It was a fancy restaurant, the kind of place we only went to on special occasions. "What's this?" I asked, but before I could get a straight answer, she was already walking toward the entrance. She didn't go in alone. Her friend from the night before was with her, just as dressed up. The two of them disappeared inside, leaving me standing there with more questions than ever. I wasn't about to let it go, though. Something about the whole situation felt off. So, I parked the car and followed them in, keeping a low profile. I found a seat by the window and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a drink, just enough to keep the waitstaff from asking questions. From my spot, I had a clear view of their table. My wife and her friend were sitting with two men in suits. One of the men held her friend's hand, while the other seemed to be in deep conversation with my wife. The atmosphere was serious at first, but then they started laughing, like they were old friends. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, just in case I'd need them later. I stayed long enough to confirm that this wasn't just a casual meeting. Whatever was going on, it was planned and deliberate. When I'd seen enough, I left the restaurant and waited in the car. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what I'd just witnessed. None of it made sense, and I was determined to get answers. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my wife, asking me to pick her up. I drove back to the restaurant and waited for her at the curb. When she got in the car, she looked pleased with herself, almost excited. "You're going to be shocked when I tell you everything," she said, a smile on her face. I didn't share her enthusiasm. "Yeah, you'll tell me," I said, keeping my voice steady. I wasn't about to let my frustration boil over. Instead, I focused on driving. Whatever this was, I'd get to the bottom of it soon enough. With that, we headed home for what I knew would be a very serious conversation. As soon as we stepped through the front door, I turned to her, my patience finally snapping. "All right, enough of this nonsense. What were you doing at that restaurant with those two guys and your friend?" I demanded, my voice firm and louder than usual. She looked at me, clearly startled by my tone. "Were you following me?" she asked, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation. I didn't back down. "Following you? Do you even hear yourself? Have you seen how you've been acting these past few days?" I shot back. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Fine," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "You're not going to like this." She handed me the paper and explained. Apparently, she had made a serious mistake at work, something big enough to attract the attention of some sleazebag who thought he could use it against her. "This guy said he'd tell my boss everything unless I agreed to go on a date with him," she said, her voice steady, though I could sense her discomfort. "And before you say anything, I didn't go. I wasn't about to stoop to his level." Hearing this, my first thought was simple: why hadn't she told me? "Why the hell didn't you come to me about this?" I asked, trying to keep my temper in check. I could have handled it. One conversation with this guy and he wouldn't have dared to pull something like this again. She shook her head. "There's no point now. He got fired not long after I did. Problem solved." Problem solved? Really? Because from where I'm standing, this doesn't look solved at all, I said. She looked away, clearly choosing her next words carefully. "I needed to figure out what to do next," she said. "Christmas is coming, we've got bills, and we can't just sit around waiting for money to fall into our laps. So, I asked my friend for help. She set up that meeting today to introduce me to some people." "What kind of people? And for what kind of job?" I asked, still not entirely convinced. She shrugged. "I don't know all the details yet. My friend has some sort of plan. She says it's a good opportunity, but she'll only explain everything when the time is right." We're supposed to go to her place next weekend, and then I'll know more. The whole thing didn't sit right with me. Plans that came with this much secrecy rarely led to anything good. Still, I knew better than to push her too hard when she'd already made up her mind. Fine, I said. But this had better be worth it. She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't thrilled with my tone. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about all of this was off. A vague plan, cryptic explanations, and now a trip to some country house next weekend. It didn't add up. But for now, there wasn't much I could do except wait. With that uneasy thought lingering in the back of my mind, I finally closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. The week leading up to the so-called big day was uneventful, but that didn't mean I was at ease. I tried to pry more details out of both my wife and her friend, but they were a united front. All in due time, they said, almost in unison, like they'd rehearsed it. If too many people know, it could all fall apart. It was maddening. They acted like everyone else was in on the secret but me. When I pressed my wife, she just gave me a reassuring smile. It's all above board, she said. Don't worry. When the day finally arrived, my wife spent the morning getting ready, choosing an outfit that turned heads, a mini skirt and a sleek blouse. I kept my attire simple but respectable, a crisp shirt and a pair of dress pants. We got into the car and drove to her friend's countryside house. I didn't know what to expect, but the sight that greeted us didn't ease my concerns. The driveway was packed with expensive cars, the kind you'd expect to see at a high-profile event, not some casual gathering. As we stepped inside, the atmosphere felt more like a lavish party than anything professional. Her friend had gone all out with decorations, drinks, and music. Almost immediately, the two men from the restaurant approached my wife. They showered her with compliments, clearly pleased to see her. I stayed close behind, observing their overly familiar behavior. When I caught up to them, I couldn't resist a dig. You two really enjoyed that dinner at the restaurant, didn't you? I said, my tone just sharp enough to make my point. Their smiles faltered for a second before one of them replied, absolutely. Tonight, though, is where the real decisions are made about your wife's future. That caught my attention. And what exactly does that mean? I asked, not bothering to hide my skepticism. One of the men smiled. She'll explain everything. It depends on the role she's chosen for. This is a unique process, as you'll see. His vague answers only raised more questions. Why not have a formal interview? I pressed. He shrugged. Formal interviews attract the wrong crowd, people who'd rather flaunt their degrees than show their true selves. Here, everyone's relaxed, open. It's a better way to gauge compatibility. As much as I wanted to argue, my wife's friend stepped in. This is how it works, she said. Just let her go through it. Trust me, everything's fine. I wasn't happy, but I stepped back. It didn't take long before my wife was called away for a private discussion. Her friend stopped me as I tried to follow. Stay here. It's part of the process, she said firmly. I clenched my jaw, frustration simmering, but I stayed put. From where I stood, I could only catch muffled voices, nothing clear enough to piece together what was going on. When my wife finally reappeared, her face was lit up with excitement. You won't believe it, she said, practically beaming. I'm going to be a senior client relations manager. The two men followed her out, congratulating her and mentioning some special assignment she'd be starting soon. Naturally, I wanted to know more. What kind of assignment? I asked. She gave me a playful smile. I'll tell you all about it when we're home. For now, let's just enjoy the night. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We mingled for a while, talking to various guests, but none of them seemed to know much about the company or its operations. It was odd, to say the least. The drive home was quiet, but my wife's excitement was palpable. As we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me. "Big things are coming," she said with a grin. "You'll see." By the time I got home that evening, I'd had enough. As soon as I walked through the door, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "All right, that's it. No more secrets," I said, my voice firm. "Tell me exactly what's going on. What's this assignment? What kind of senior manager role is this? And who the hell are these people? Why is everything so unofficial?" My wife looked up at me, startled by my sudden outburst, but she quickly composed herself. "Look," she said, motioning for me to sit down. "It's just how the company works. The department I'm joining is very private. They've got their own way of doing things. It's not like your typical corporate setup." I crossed my arms and waited for her to elaborate. "They organize something. I'm not entirely sure what yet. But they've made it clear that I'll find out everything once I start on Monday." Her explanation didn't do much to ease my concerns. "You took a job without knowing exactly what you'll be doing?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. "And you expect me to be okay with that?" She sighed. "They've been upfront about the confidentiality of their operations. It's part of their policy. Besides, it's not like I had a ton of options after losing my last job." "And what about the pay?" I asked, shifting gears. If nothing else, I needed to know if this was at least financially worth all the mystery. Her face brightened a bit. "The pay's good. Really good. We'll be able to cover everything for Christmas and still have money left over. It's a big step up from what I was making before." That part was at least some consolation, but it didn't completely erase my doubts. "Fine," I said. "But you're telling me everything as soon as you know what's going on. No more of this, when the time is right, nonsense." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't thrilled about my tone. "Of course," she said, trying to sound reassuring. "So, what's with the early start tomorrow?" I asked. "You said you don't officially start until Monday." She shrugged. "I have to meet someone from the company. They're going to show me around and go over some initial details. It's a bit of an orientation, I guess. Plus, the commute is longer than I'm used to, so I've got to leave extra early." "All right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But I'm telling you now, I don't like all this secrecy. If something seems off, I'm pulling you out of it. Understood?" She smiled faintly. "Understood. But you'll see. Everything's going to be fine." With that, we headed to bed. She fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake for a while, my mind turning over everything she'd said. The secrecy, the special assignment, the strange recruitment process, it all felt too convoluted to be as harmless as she made it seem. Still, there was nothing I could do for now. Eventually, I closed my eyes, wondering what the next few days would bring. I woke up that morning to an empty bed, which wasn't completely unusual. What caught my attention was the note she'd left on the nightstand: "Breakfast is on the stove." Something about it felt rushed, almost too casual for her. I got up, headed to the kitchen, and found the promised breakfast. But even as I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just her absence, there was an air of urgency that seemed to linger in the house. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check the bedroom closet. What I saw there didn't sit right with me. Clothes were out of place, like someone had gone through them in a hurry. More concerning was what was missing: a dress I'd always considered too intimate for casual outings and, more notably, a set of lace lingerie I'd never seen her wear outside the house. That wasn't something she'd just forget about. I grabbed my phone and called her immediately. She picked up, but the background noise made it hard to hear. Voices, laughter, and what sounded like music filled the line. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you wearing?" She sighed. "I can't talk right now," she said. There's a serious problem I'm dealing with. I'll explain everything when I get home. Before I could say anything else, she hung up. Frustrated, I paced the house for a while before opening a chat with a few of my friends. Talking it over with them only made things worse. They had their theories, none of them reassuring, and by the end of the conversation, I was more worked up than when I started. My mind was racing, filling in blanks with worst-case scenarios. When she finally walked through the door later that day, she looked tired but calm. "You won't believe the day I've had," she said, dropping her bag by the door. I didn't let her continue. "Take off your coat," I said bluntly. She gave me a puzzled look. "What? Why?" "Just do it," I insisted. Reluctantly, she obliged. When I didn't see the lingerie or the dress, I crossed my arms. "Where are they? The dress and the lace set. Did you wear them to work?" Her confusion turned to irritation. "Are you serious right now? They're in the laundry." I tried them on but decided they needed washing. "You've been acting paranoid lately. Honestly, it's getting exhausting." Her words stung, but she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been on edge ever since this whole secretive job thing started. "Fine," I said. "But at least tell me what happened today." She nodded and sat down. "They asked me to organize a major event. It's top secret, apparently. But the big news is that they're planning a surprise for me during the company's upcoming holiday party." That caught my attention. "What kind of surprise?" I asked, skeptical. She shrugged. "I have no idea. But it's happening at my friend's house in the countryside. We're both going, so you'll see it for yourself." Her excitement was palpable, but I wasn't convinced. Something about all of this still felt off. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully. She seemed genuinely happy about the upcoming event, and I didn't press her further. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what kind of surprise could possibly require this much secrecy. The day ended with more questions than answers, leaving me to wonder what was really going on. That evening, she came rushing through the door, breathless and hurried. "We need to go now," she said, barely giving me a moment to process. "I got held up at work, and we're already late." Confused but not wanting to argue, I threw on my coat and followed her out to the car. As I drove, she gave me directions to her friend's countryside house. The urgency in her voice was enough to keep me from asking too many questions. When we arrived, the house was lit up like a carnival. Music spilled out onto the driveway, and as soon as we stepped inside, a flurry of confetti and balloons greeted us. The atmosphere was festive, almost over the top. People were laughing, chatting, and clinking glasses of champagne. It was clear that this was more than just a casual gathering. We made our way through the crowd, and I noticed how many people stopped to congratulate my wife. Some even raised their glasses in her honor. It seemed like everyone there knew about her new job and was genuinely happy for her. Despite my reservations, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride seeing her in the spotlight. Then, one of the men from the restaurant, the one who'd been part of the original interview, climbed onto a table, holding a glass high. "All right, everyone," he announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Now that we've had our fun, it's time for the main event, the swinger party." My heart stopped for a moment, and I froze, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. The room erupted in cheers, and to my disbelief, people actually started undressing. It was chaos. Without a second thought, I grabbed my wife's hand and pulled her toward the door. "What are you doing?" she protested, trying to resist. "We don't have to join in." Her words only made me more determined to get out of there. By the time we reached the car, her phone was already buzzing with calls and messages. "Where are you? What happened? Are you coming back?" She answered one of them, explaining that I wasn't feeling well and that we had to leave. Her tone was calm, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. When we got home, I didn't wait long before confronting her. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice rising. "Do you seriously think it's okay to be part of something like that?" She sighed, clearly irritated. "We didn't have to participate," she said. "You didn't even give me a chance to explain." I shook my head. "I don't care what the conditions were. You're not going back there." She crossed her arms and looked at me, her expression defiant. "Fine," she said, "but I'm not quitting. I have a job to do, and I'm not leaving after just 1 week." After a couple of relatively calm days, I decided it was time to get some answers. "So, what's going on with that assignment of yours?" I asked her one evening. She was sitting on the couch, her laptop open, but she paused to look at me. "I'm still working on it," she said. "It's a big project, and there's a lot to figure out. I'll tell you everything once it's finalized." That answer didn't do much to ease my concerns. "You've been acting strange lately," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "And after what happened at that party, I'm finding it hard to trust this whole setup." She sighed, clearly frustrated. "Look," she said, "that party was a one-off. There are idiots everywhere, but it doesn't mean the entire job is like that. Can we please stop bringing it up?" I didn't press further, but her words didn't exactly reassure me. Over the next week, her schedule became more demanding. She started coming home later and later, always claiming she was tied up at work. "We're working on some incredible ideas," she said one night. "The team is really coming together, and I'm confident this is going to be a success." But her late nights didn't sit well with me. I couldn't help but notice how tired she looked every time she walked through the door. When I brought it up, she brushed me off, saying it was just part of the job. "This is the kind of opportunity that could make or break my career," she said. "I have to give it my all." Despite her enthusiasm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this job was off. Her explanations were always vague, and the secrecy surrounding her assignment didn't help. Still, I kept my concerns to myself, not wanting to start another argument. Then, one evening, she came home looking more energized than she had in days. "Tomorrow is the big day," she said with a wide smile. "Everything we've been working on leads up to this. It's going to be huge, and I'm so excited to finally see it come together." Her excitement was contagious, even if I didn't fully understand what she was talking about. "So, what exactly is happening tomorrow?" I asked, hoping for a clearer answer this time. She shook her head, still smiling. "You'll have to wait and see. But trust me, it's going to be worth it. This could even lead to a big raise for me," she added. "Just wait until tomorrow, I'll have so much to tell you." With that, she went off to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As much as I wanted to believe her, the secrecy and late nights still gnawed at me. But for now, all I could do was wait and see what this massive event was all about. That evening, I got home from work to find the house eerily quiet. She wasn't there, which wasn't entirely unusual given her recent late nights. But as the hours passed, her absence began to weigh on me. I tried calling her, but the phone rang endlessly with no answer. Frustrated, I left her a message and waited, pacing the living room. It was well past midnight when the front door finally creaked open. She stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, her clothes disheveled and stained with some kind of white liquid. She didn't say a word, just made her way unsteadily to the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. Watching her like that, I couldn't suppress the anger bubbling inside me. Something was very wrong. While she lay passed out, I grabbed her phone, desperate for answers. What I found shocked me to my core. Text after text revealed that she was organizing swinger parties, events that, from the photos and messages, looked far more like a seedy operation than anything professional. My stomach churned as I scrolled further. In one group chat, her so-called colleagues referred to her with a vulgar nickname that left no doubt about her involvement. And then I found the video. It wasn't just her hosting these events, she was participating, and not just with one person. The footage showed her with multiple people from her office, laughing and fully engaged in what could only be described as betrayal in its rawest form. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking with fury. Without a word, I went to the closet and started pulling out her clothes. Every dress, every pair of shoes, every trace of her went straight into trash bags. I wasn't going to let her stay another night under my roof. By the time I was done, the bags were piled by the door, ready for her to take when she woke up. The next morning, she woke up groggy and confused. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I didn't mince words. "What's going on? Are you seriously asking me that? Maybe it's the fact that you've been lying to me. Or maybe it's that video of you screwing half your office. Take your pick." Her confusion quickly turned to anger. "You went through my phone," she snapped. "That's private." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Private? That's what you're worried about? You're covered in God knows what, and you think I'm the problem." She crossed her arms and glared at me. "You just don't understand. I enjoy it, okay? So stop trying to control me and stay out of my business." That was the final straw. "Get out," I said, my voice cold. "Take your things and leave. You're not staying here another minute." After she left, I wasted no time. Her betrayal wasn't just personal, it felt criminal. I hired an attorney and laid out everything I'd uncovered. Together, we started piecing the puzzle together, focusing on the company that had been enabling her activities. The deeper we dug, the uglier the picture became. Records, testimonies, and even anonymous tips pointed to a well-organized operation that blurred the lines between business and exploitation. The next step was identifying the people at the top. It wasn't easy, but persistence paid off. We uncovered the names of the key players, her bosses, event organizers, and other facilitators. Armed with this information, my lawyer and I filed a lawsuit against the company, accusing them of running an illicit operation under the guise of legitimate business practices. The evidence was damning, and soon enough, the authorities stepped in. As the case gained traction, the company's facade crumbled. Former employees came forward, sharing their experiences and corroborating our findings. The court didn't take long to rule in our favor. The so-called business was shut down, its leaders facing hefty fines and, in some cases, criminal charges. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step toward justice. With the company out of the picture, I turned my attention back to her. Divorce was inevitable, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. The court battle was tense, but the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The video, the texts, and even her admission of enjoying the lifestyle painted a clear picture. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, granting me the divorce and ensuring she had no claim to anything I'd worked for. But the story didn't end there. One morning, I received a call from her. Her voice was dripping with venom. "You're the worst person I've ever met," she spat. "Do you know how many people you've put out of work? All because of your vendetta." I stayed calm. "That's exactly what I wanted," I replied. "Maybe now they'll find jobs that don't involve destroying lives." Her anger only grew. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll make sure your life is a living hell." True to her word, she began spreading lies about me. She told mutual acquaintances that I was abusive, tried to sabotage my work by emailing false complaints to my boss, and even posted defamatory comments about me online. Each attack required a response. I documented everything, every message, every rumor, every attempt to tarnish my reputation. My attorney and I filed cease and desist letters, and when she crossed the line, we didn't hesitate to take her back to court. Each time, the evidence cleared my name and exposed her vindictiveness for what it was. In the end, the truth prevailed. The court issued a restraining order against her, barring her from contacting me or interfering in my life. Her attempts to ruin me only solidified my resolve, and I came out stronger. She may have tried to break me, but all she did was prove that I was better off without her. In the aftermath of the legal battles and her relentless attempts to ruin me, I decided it was time to take control of the narrative. For too long, I had been reacting to her actions, defending myself against her lies and manipulations. It was time to go on the offensive. Among the evidence I had collected was the damning video that showed the full extent of her betrayal. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I knew what had to be done. I started by sharing the video with a select group of people who needed to see the truth, her closest friends and family. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake, it was about ensuring that everyone understood the kind of person she had become. Her facade of innocence and victimhood had shielded her from accountability for too long. The reactions were swift and devastating for her. Many of her friends, who had previously stood by her, cut ties immediately. Family members who had defended her were left speechless. Word spread quickly. The video's existence became a whispered scandal among her social circles. Invitations to events dried up, and even her professional connections seemed to distance themselves. The consequences of her actions were finally catching up to her. She tried to spin the situation in her favor, of course, claiming that I was out to ruin her life. But the evidence was irrefutable, and her credibility was in tatters. Unable to handle the mounting judgment and isolation, she made the decision to leave the city. She packed up her belongings and moved to a place where she could start over, far from the people who now saw her for who she truly was. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling to rebuild her life, but by then, I had stopped paying attention. Her problems were no longer mine to bear. As for me, the house we had shared was a constant reminder of the chaos she had brought into my life. Selling it was the only logical step. The process was cathartic in a way, like shedding the last remnants of a toxic chapter. With the money from the sale, I moved to a new neighborhood, one where her shadow couldn't reach me. It was a fresh start, both physically and emotionally. In my new home, I found peace for the first time in what felt like years. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was comforting. I focused on rebuilding my life, reconnecting with old friends, and pursuing hobbies I had neglected. Each day felt like a step toward reclaiming the person I had been before she came into my life. People often ask me why I took such drastic measures, why I went as far as sharing the video. My answer is simple: sometimes, the truth needs to come to light, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Her actions had consequences, and it was time for her to face them. I didn't do it out of spite, I did it because it was the only way to truly move on. When you've been wronged, justice isn't about revenge, it's about closure. Now, as I look back on everything that happened, I'm at peace with my choices. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again. The scars she left behind have become reminders of my resilience. I've learned to value honesty, loyalty, and, most importantly, myself. And that, I think, is the clearest answer to the question everyone seems to ask: why did I fight so hard? Because I deserved better, and now I have it.